good evening, good day. One of the reasons I got interested in the neo-reactionary movement was the desire to understand the chessboard. It feels that the life that we live in the modern world is like playing chess. You have to make all these strategic and tactical decisions, and yet you cannot see the chessboard. And so there was this desire inside of me to understand the chessboard, and that is what led me to the neo-reactionary movement and various other ideologies, right, in an attempt to understand what the chessboard looks like and what the pieces are. And as part of the request of a commenter, I just wanted to apply some of the more general things that I spoke about to a more specific case. The last series of videos I did concerned itself with describing the nature of the decay that we're experiencing. What's wrong with the leadership class, and then how is that manifesting amongst the people that they're leading or amongst the people that they're following. And some would feel that it was too general and it doesn't apply to the immediate context. And it does seem like such an odd thing to say, but I would say that it's literally a global problem. Any place that has been touched by the current regime will or is suffering from that problem one from another. So I thought that I would do a little power analysis in the country of Kenya, that's in East Africa, right? And I would like to particularly zero in on what I consider to be night pieces of the regime. The night pieces, I think, are those that can be used to sidestep certain obstacles in order to accomplish their goals. So whether it's due to the presence of legal or cultural barriers, or a particular elite or ideology that's more prevalent in the community that limits the regime's capacity and ability to exercise their power and their influence in the region. And this stems from an argument I was having with a relative, where he does believe that the class degradation of the West is absolute in Kenya. And the two frames that he put forward to defend that position was, one, he cited the state visit by Obama and how, despite his popularity in Kenya, he could not sell the global Homo message, right? And then the absence of wokeness within the Kenyan elite. But I think he is confusing himself between the old guard and the new guard and the language they're using and how they're looking to sell the idea to the public. Because global Homo does not manifest in one singular way in a region. It takes the guise of many forms. If I could just take a metaphor from the Bible, it's a wolf in sheep's clothing, right? And the skin, right? The clothing that it puts under itself, it's to make it more palatable, right? And allow it to infiltrate the particular area, in fact, the particular area that it aims to influence. The sources that I'm making use of is the Eternal Mosca, right? In the Skeptical Waves YouTube channel, which I think is a fantastic resource. There's so many different audio versions of books that he's narrating, and so it's quite helpful to listen and read at the same time. It also will cite material from the 4 news channels, or 4 channels that concern themselves with Kenyan politics, right? Lee McQueen, Fifth Estate, The Citizen News Channel, Nation TV News Channel. I'll also draw from the book Our Time to Eat by Michel Larong. I'll also try to draw from Kenya African Nationalism by Daniel Arap Moi, who was Kenya's president and longest reigning president, right? And also borrow from this book, The Women's Movement in Kenya by S.A. Kasiani and L. Njero. Right? And it was published by the Association of African Women for Research and Development. And so I think it will allow me to catch. So I'm hoping to be able to draw from all these sources to show how the neo-reactionary frame does help us to see the hand of the regime, right, in this particular context. So what do I mean by the regime? Right, I'm thinking that they are the ruling elite, right? The ones that direct and coordinate the use and the exploitation of the various resources in their community. And I would say that the Kenyan elite is part of a periphery. It's a province, right, of this currently existing regime, right, which is making use of these international networks, right. And I think this relationship takes the form of informal control and intelligence in contrast to formal control. For example, the English Empire, right, the British Empire, had set up its network in a formal manner, right? So Kenya was it was an English colony, right? I mean, it was a British colony on the African continent, right? And they even reserved land for natives, right? The native reserve. And one of the fascinating things I found in one of my travels to one of those regions that was a native reserve was, to this day, some older people refer to their territory as the reserve, right? Which is something interesting to note. And so one of the cogs, right, the method by which the regime extends its influence and makes its power felt in this periphery area called Kenya is through non-state actors, right, through donations, right, and particularly I want to zero in on the NGOs and the activist groups, right, so they do these things by funding. And so when I started looking into the biggest donors, right, onto Africa, to the NGOs that operate in Kenya, right, and the things that they're looking to tackle, many times you find democracy, poverty, women, youth, repeated time and time again, right. These organizations, you find that they are based around American, USA, UK, EU, UN, France, Norway, Denmark, right? And you find this strange message of equity, and now it's clothed, it's dressed in the form of democracy and the concern for women and the concern for children, right? And so the same message, right? The same message that is behind the degradation of the West, right? The class degradation, right, in the West. You find it's also manifesting in Africa, right? But then the same message is adapted for the local audience, right? A good example would be, I was listening to some Joe Biden speeches, and I've noticed a distinct on how he speaks to Christians versus how he speaks to socialists, right? So when he's talking to the Christians, he starts off by saying, I'm one of you, right? He starts by speaking about how his Catholic faith is important to him, right? And how his love for people and the message of love of Christ is inflamed towards these policies that he's presenting. But then when he's talking to the socialists, he takes a very different frame. So he also still comes again with the whole idea that, yes, I am one of you, right? In that I want what's best for these people. And you see, yeah, so I think that you get the point that I'm trying to make in this in this context, right? In looking through the various websites, I found the Ford Foundation, right? And they talked about removing barriers, right, to democracy and all this, you know, the normal buzzwords that are used to sell their cause or to justify who they support, who they employ, and whom they fund, right? And it's interesting how it was, Christina Hoff Summers in her book, The One Boys, talking about the role the Ford Foundation played in what she's describing as the war against boys in the United States, and how the role they played is through funding and advancing certain types of research, right? You look at the Oslo Center that's operating in Kenya. They're talking about seeking more inclusion and more transparency, more democracy, looking at the NIDA and the Danish Embassy. It's actually the Uriah Trust, not Glass Trust, right? CEDA and the Swedish Embassy, you have UK Aid, US Aid. The European Union also focusing on the pastoralist communities, right? Partnering with the likes of UN Women, and they're looking to help, right, the pastoral communities, right? Because their culture and their traditions is a significant problem to their women, right? And they're looking to empower the women of those communities and cultures, right? And also to push them to participate more in the economy, right? Then you find the Center for Foreign Relations, right? This one's American, talking about the important thing they had an article on the site about their take on the 2007 violence, right? It's a small section. It was more of a by the way. And they're talking about that there's this need for the US to strengthen Kenyan's political institutions in order to avoid violence, right? And so you find that the causes that are being presented, the means by which this usurpation, right, is being injected into this community, the cycling the elites to be the kind of elites that will interface themselves to the network, right? Because if we can think of the market, this global economic market, like there's nothing that forces the world to have just one global economic market, right? But it's kind of like, let's say, Facebook. Supposing we say that everybody who wants to do social media has to do it on Facebook, that gives Facebook a lot of power, a lot of influence, and it's able to profit greatly, right, out of that consolidation. And so what if the same thing is actually happening on the international stage, right, on the global market system, right, whereby then now the market is being controlled by the regime, right, and by interfacing and integrating more people to be dependent on this market on what they need, it does give them more power and it does give them more influence. But then why would I want to abandon my traditional way of life? I think because they're materialists, they're saying that, hey, you can have a better material future, right? You don't have to be a pastoralist, right? You don't have to migrate. You don't have to get married for your dreams to come true. But then, what are these dreams that they are imagining and talking about? You can be anything that you want to be within our economic framework, right? And so that's the pattern. And so you see, then now these groups are now used to pressure, right, the legislative bodies, right? Because with democracy, there's a need to win elections, right? But then with funding is what you need to campaign. And so if there's this group that promises you votes, so let's say the women of Nairobi, they serve as a platform, as a source of influence, right? So that's why I'm thinking of them as the knight, right? The way the knight moves uniquely, right, on the chessboard, right? And so these are used as knights, and you're using the knights in conjunction to the pawns, right? And so it's now using this influence, this informal power, these informal channels, right, to start using the political structures, the formal institutions as pawns in your game. So in this manner, you can bring out certain policies that you desire, because they will fund particular policies, right, and they will look to advance those certain political policies. And you find that with the campaigning for the 2022 presidential campaigns, right, you see an interesting pattern into what the different candidates. I listened to speeches and read of about six candidates, and I've been able to identify like some common lines of reasoning, some common words that they all use. All of them talking about the need to, reform the economy to make it more accessible to everyone. So there's this right, and there's this focus on women and youth, right, and how they are going to change everything and it will make a difference, right? So you can talk about that. Hey, we can bring in more international funding into local projects, or why don't we focus economy first on the lowest of the low, right? So the so-called bottom-up approach, and you see, they're all this. I think of them as smoke screens, right? And it's the same pattern that's happened. I think from what I've followed in my various readings on the matter, is same pattern from the 60s, right? So in the 60s, Kenya, there was this idea that with under African rule, within this new international global order, with one party to unite all the various African peoples, we can build an African nation, right? And then when this is not working out, when it doesn't seem to be the case, in the 70s, you're thinking like, oh, maybe it's Uhuru Kenyatta that is the problem, right? But even though he's also getting a lot of support from the regime, right? And Kenya's looking like a success story, right? But then he dies and a new leader comes into place, and he managed to consolidate power. He managed to deal with some of his opponents, and even survives a coup in the 80s, right? But then by the 90s, he is now the problem, right? But then the solution to avoid the situation that you had under Moi and under Kenyatta, right? The shift is now that, hey, you need to have multi-party politics and you need to have democracy, right? And that is what will solve the problem, and that is what will give us political freedom, and from the political freedom, we'll be able to have the economic freedom, and from the economic freedom, people will be able to accomplish their dreams and they live their life that they desired, right? And finally, they managed to knock out Moi in 2002, right? With this whole idea of Kibaki Tosha, right? And the opposition has come together, right? And you have economic growth. But then this new regime comes to power, and some of the key sponsors in this project decide that it's now their time to eat. It's now the time to exploit the resources of government, right, and use it to enrich their private estates. And it's the subject of Michel Larong's book, Our Time to Eat. And during that presidency, it was actually banned. And so it just so happened when it was published, I was in a non-Kenyan country, right? And it's quite fascinating to see that they were behind the president, so in order that they can now present their private interest as public concerns, and use that and to exploit the system, right, that's in place in order to enrich themselves and to enrich their estates, right? Then in 2007, we'll have the unity government, right? Because if we have unity and you deal with corruption, that's when now the same story, the same cycle, right? After political freedom, you'll be able to have economic freedom. Under economic freedom, right, you'll be able to build your economy and you'll be able to have your dreams come true, right? And it turned out not to be the case, and no matter all these different projects, right? And so it's the same cycle, right? And every election, every candidate is talking about, yes, this is how we're going to fix these problems that have been endemic from the 60s. The only difference is that as the population grows and people are coming more and more cultured into this parliamentary political system, compared to the independence that the average community had from the central government in the 60s, right? And so we have a growth of what would the best word to use to describe it? Dependency, maybe you want to say destitution, people becoming destitute, right? People lacking the means of subsistence aside from formal employment, right, or crime. And yeah, so that the thing is that the political and the social problems in the formal stage have not really changed, but the mechanisms by which the communities were able to shield themselves against that pressure and to be able to lead good lives were being waked considerably over the centuries, right? And I would like to say that the establishment was wrong to think that, hey, it was their time to eat, because ultimately all the activities is subject to the will and the function of the regime, right? Because for them, they've got their own goals, right? Let's say in Libya, the goal in Libya is to extract oil, right? The goal from Congo is to extract something else. Kenya serves as a province, a communication hub, right? For various organizations, right? To coordinate the activities amongst the continent. Because in their mindset, they believe is that they're these agents of change that are bringing up this enlightenment, right? That they are leading people to a great dawn of a new future of long life and health and prosperity, right? And unity and love and the normal buzzwords that we hear about. And so you see that now the process is to be done in an informal manner, and these people need to be integrated into this regime, right? And just to further emphasize that, so just read a few things that I found in the website. So this one is from the Council for Foreign Relations, right? And it was on the article on the Gates Foundation, right? And particularly they were talking about how these non-state actors have been effective, right? And they're saying in the 1960s and 70s, the Rockefeller and Ford Foundations played important roles in spurring the Green Revolution, in which developed countries transferred agricultural technology to peasants and farmers in Asia, eliminating the threat of famine in many countries. Another prominent private group is the Soros Foundation, a major donor to human rights, civil society, health, and democratization causes. Founded by George Soros, the foundation has been accused by some authoritarian governments in the former Soviet Union of interference after revolutions in the Ukraine, Georgia, Serbia, countries where his organizations have been active, right? And so from their frame of mind, from the perspective of the regime, we are helping people to have better lives, right? So how are they doing that? What they're doing is that they're cycling elites, right? If you now think about, like, okay, from Moscow, right? You have a ruling class. The ruling class is always a minority, and they have a story that gives their rule legitimacy, right? And so there's still that competition, right, for who gets with the elite, who gets to guide and rule the people. And so this organization funds and empowers a new set of elites to displace the old ones, right? But for them, they're doing a good thing. But then, incidentally, ironically, these new regimes, this new set of elites, right, make themselves subservient to the aims and the goals of the regime itself, right? Then there's this other research site, right? It's called Interactions, right? And then this is the way they describe themselves, that they are a platform for research and analysis on women's economic empowerment, gender-based violence, urban health, and unpaid care work, right? I got it from the IDS website, right? And then hosted by IDS and co-produced with partners around the world. Interactions provide vital evidence and policy-relevant recommendations for the empowerment of women and girls, as well as working with men and boys for gender equality. And from another section of the site, in one of the articles when I was reading the section they had on Kenya, right? They put this section of, this guide is part of the wider Interactions for Gender Justice family, including Sexuality, Poverty and Law program, and Male, Boys and Gender Equality. And so, to them, the cultural arrangement, the social arrangement within the Kenyan communities, right? It's such to them that the treatment of the family structure is something that is so horrid that has to be readjusted to mirror what they believe is their ideal, right? And the term they use for the ideal is equality, right? And so there was that section now when they're discussing they're describing the state of things in Kenya, right? And remember this organization is talking like their goal is reframing gender justice in an unequal, volatile world, right? So this is how they perceive the state of all human society, all human cultures in current existence, right? And to them, a particular problem in Kenya is unpaid care, right? So unpaid care, in what sense? They're not being paid under the regime's economic network, right? Some of these people are operating in an independent local network, economic network, all right? And so these women, let's say they take care of so women are the ones who are taking care of the home, and the men will bring back whatever they had and things of the sort. But for them, that is a problem, right? Because these women need to be integrated into the economic network of the regime, and their subsistence should come to their connection to the economic network of the regime. It's the economic equivalent of everybody must be connected to Facebook, right? This person is unpaid. Why? Because they're not getting their fair payment from Facebook, for instance, right? And they're discussing now the political legislation in Kenya in the 90s, right? They're saying that the campaign was bolstered by the emphasis of international finance institutions and donors on good governance, enabling campaigners to secure political support and financial assistance from international development organizations, right? So these organizations are basically knight pieces on a chessboard, right? And for me, I think corruption, the mistake we make is to define corruption purely as just looting, right? But then there is an organic elite or circulation process that communities usually develop on their own, right? That is organic. But then now when you interfere in it, you're corrupting the system. You're making it function that the way that it's not supposed to function, right? And the mechanisms by which they had social cohesion and people were able to find significance and meaning in their lives, right? They co-opt them and direct them into another frame, right? And so when I was looking at some of the data I found up to for 2019, there's an increase in unemployment, an increase in suicide, increase in divorce, decrease in family formation, increase in crime. Same progression in Western societies, right? That has been the trend. Well, with the exception of employment, which fluctuates, right? Yeah. But then when you're looking at markers for social health, right? The things that are quantifiable. What do we observe? Conquest has got 3 laws, right? 3 political laws. And it says everyone is conservative about what they know best. Any organization not explicitly and constitutional right-wing will sooner or later become left-wing. The behavior of any bureaucratic organization can be best understood by assuming that it is controlled by a secret cabal of its enemies. So when we now apply that to the Kenyan government, right, and you compare with the speeches of the various people that are supposed to represent it and to guide it, to direct it, and you compare with the different philosophies and argumentation that's used to justify what they want wish to build, don't we see a disconnect? And doesn't it seem to mirror Conquest 3 laws? And so, what is the state of the Kenyan board? How should we understand power in Kenya? Do not disregard the role of foreign powers agitating social forces in a particular direction. And it's social forces in the sense that Mosca describes in his book, right? Rather, describes in one of his books. Yeah. The ruling class. And so, how does this reflect? Okay. The purpose of this is to now, it's not really to blackmail people, right? But it's rather to understand what the chessboard looks like and what pieces are doing what. And so, don't be taken in by promises, right? The statement wolf in sheep's clothing can also describe the words. It's not what the thesis said, but rather the implication of the statement. Equality in itself is not something that people would object to. But in their context, how are they looking to implement it? What does it mean? And so, the Kenyan government is not an independent sovereign unit, as some like to think. It's rather a periphery, right? A province, an agent, an institution by which the actual regime, right? The forces that actually make the rules and direct the strategy and the policy, the ones who decide the exceptions. They are the ones that are actually in charge, right? And the Kenyan government is an instrument to enact their will. And the looting and the corruption within the system is part of the cost of doing business. Yeah, right. But then, what would be more beneficial to the people? What would be more useful for them? Are they really okayed under this centralized mammoth civil service that is corrupt from top to bottom? Aren't they better off moving away from that parliamentary model and look to build from the ground up again institutions from within their communities with people that they can trust, with people that are invested in their well-being and their future, those that share a common destiny? Well, I hope that would give you food for thought, right? And it will push you to look towards parallel institutions and to look for ways to subsist in contrast to the current existing one. And should the current existing one become too big or too corrupt, right, or too overloaded by the pressures of all that it's trying to contain and absorb, if it should break and collapse, you and your loved ones should be fine. Have a good evening.